Think our food today is diverse? Well, medieval meals had a whole bunch of veggies we've totally forgotten about. These lost flavors once fed both kings and peasants, and their stories are way more interesting than anything you'd find at the grocery store. Let's dig up these forgotten culinary gems from the past. Let's start with skirret, which was once the pride of many medieval gardens across Europe. This root vegetable looked like a bunch of skinny, pale carrots growing in a cluster from a single point. Basically what would happen if carrots decided to form a boy band. What made skirret special wasn't its appearance, but its remarkable natural sweetness. In a time before sugar was common, skirret was nature's candy growing right in the backyard. Medieval cooks prepared skirret much like we do potatoes today. They boiled it, mashed it, and even added it to pies and tarts. The sweetness of skirret meant it could cross the line between main dish and dessert easily. Talk about an overachiever. It's the medieval equivalent of that annoying kid who was good at both sports and math. One cookbook from the 1400s recommends boiling skirret roots until tender, then frying them in honey and butter, a dish that would probably still taste amazing today. King Henry VIII reportedly loved skirret so much that it appeared regularly at royal feasts. Maybe if he'd focused more on his vegetable garden than on getting new wives, history would have turned out differently. Then again, divorced, beheaded, and ate skirret doesn't have the same ring to it. The royal connection helped skirret maintain its popularity throughout the Tudor period. So why don't we eat skirret today? When potatoes arrived from the Americas, they quickly took over European farming. Potatoes yielded more food per acre, grew more consistently, and stored better through winter. Potatoes basically showed up and bullied skirret out of existence, the agricultural equivalent of stealing someone's lunch money. Gradually, skirret disappeared from gardens and dinner tables. A few dedicated food historians and heirloom gardeners still grow skirret today. The taste is described as sweet and nutty with hints of parsnip and carrot. Some say it has notes of coconut or vanilla, flavors that medieval people wouldn't have recognized but certainly enjoyed. Tastes like coconut, said no medieval peasant ever. While the skirret faded into obscurity, another root vegetable managed to hang around a bit longer, though with quite a different appeal to medieval taste buds. Ever heard of a vegetable identity crisis? Meet Alexander's, the ancient plant that wanted to be everything at once. Before kale and spinach dominated health food stores, Alexander's ruled medieval gardens with its do-it-all attitude. It's like that friend who claims they can sing, dance, and cook, but you've only ever seen them trip over their own feet. Alexander's was once a staple green across Europe, particularly around the Mediterranean. The Romans actually brought it to Britain, where it spread like wildfire along coastal areas. Every part of the plant was useful. The stems could be eaten like celery. The leaves worked like spinach or parsley. The roots substituted for parsnips, and even the seeds could be used as a peppery spice. Talk about a plant with commitment issues. It couldn't just pick one job and stick with it. The taste of Alexander's falls somewhere between celery and parsley, with an added kick of bitterness and a hint of black pepper. Medieval cooks tossed it into pretty much everything: soups, stews, salads, and side dishes. During winter and early spring, when other greens were scarce, Alexander's was often the only fresh vegetable available. What made Alexander's particularly valuable was how easy it grew. It didn't need fancy soil or special care. It just popped up along roadsides and ditches and near coastal areas. It was basically the weed that medieval people decided to eat instead of kill. A much better approach than modern homeowners take with dandelions. Many medieval monasteries maintained patches of Alexander's as emergency food. Historical records from the year 1000 show that some monks in northern Europe survived harsh winters by relying on this hardy plant when their other food stores ran out. For those monks, Alexander's wasn't just dinner, it was the difference between life and starvation. With all these benefits, you might wonder why we abandoned Alexander's. The truth? Celery happened. When cultivated celery with its milder taste became widely available in the 1600s, people gradually forgot about Alexander's. It's the vegetable equivalent of being ghosted. One day everyone was eating it, the next day they'd moved on to the newer, trendier option. Today, Alexander's still grows wild in many coastal areas of Europe, particularly in the UK and Mediterranean regions. Foragers and food history buffs harvest it, while the rest of us eat boring celery without realizing we've downgraded from a vegetable superhero to a sidekick. While Alexander's faded from fashion due to its strong flavor, another medieval vegetable disappeared despite being surprisingly delicious. How many people today would pay extra for a vegetable that looks like a black wrinkly carrot? Back in medieval times, scorzonera was exactly this, a luxury root that wealthy households splurged on despite its rather unimpressive appearance. Rich medieval folks would shell out serious coin for what basically looked like a carrot that fell into a chimney. Scorzonera, also known as black salsify, has a unique history among medieval vegetables. Unlike many common garden plants that grew wild before cultivation, scorzonera was specifically brought to Europe from Spain and Italy during the 1500s. The name itself comes from the Italian scorza nera, meaning black skin, a straightforward description if there ever was one. Beneath that rough, dark exterior hides a surprising taste that medieval gourmets couldn't get enough of. When cooked, scorzonera offers a flavor often described as earthy and slightly nutty, with unexpected hints of artichoke and oyster. One medieval cooking manuscript from 1465 describes it as the root that tastes of the sea and earth together, fit for a lord's table. The white flesh inside stays firm when cooked, yet becomes tender enough to melt in your mouth. Preparing scorzonera was no simple task. Medieval cooks had to scrape off the tough outer skin, then quickly place the exposed white flesh in vinegar water to prevent discoloration. It was the medieval version of high-maintenance food prep. All that work for something that still looked like a stick on your plate. The roots were typically boiled, then served with butter or rich meat drippings, sometimes alongside game meats like venison or wild boar. What made scorzonera particularly valuable in medieval times was its supposed medicinal properties. The plant got its scientific name, Scorzonera hispanica, from the belief that it could cure poisonous snake bites. Scorzonera resembles escorzon, the Catalan word for venomous snakes. When medical treatment involved bloodletting and strange potions, eating a fancy black carrot to cure snake bites actually seemed pretty reasonable by comparison. Medieval physicians prescribed scorzonera for everything from snake bites to plague symptoms. A medical text from 1580 claims, "The root taken with wine protects against all venoms and poisons, especially against the bite of vipers." While these medical claims eventually proved false, the vegetable's reputation as a luxury food item persisted. Scorzonera gradually disappeared from common cooking as changing tastes and newer vegetables took center stage. Unlike some completely vanished medieval vegetables, scorzonera still grows today in specialized gardens, though you won't find it in your regular grocery store. From the fancy tables of medieval nobility to obscurity, scorzonera's fall from favor paved the way for another oddly named medieval plant. Imagine a vegetable so underrated that people named it after a king just to make it sound important. That's exactly what happened with Good King Henry, a leafy green that fed countless medieval peasants across Europe. Despite its royal name, this plant was anything but fancy. It was the go-to green for common folk who couldn't afford exotic imports or special garden plots. Good King Henry, scientifically known as Chenopodium bonus henricus, grew abundantly in the wild and was later cultivated in cottage gardens. The plant features arrow-shaped, dark green leaves that sprout from a central stem, growing up to 2 feet tall in ideal conditions. Medieval cooks harvested the young shoots in spring like asparagus, while the mature leaves were gathered throughout summer and autumn, providing a nearly year-round food source. Why the odd name? No one knows for certain. Some say it was named after a German house sprite called Heinz, who was believed to help around the home. Others claim it references King Henry IV of France, who wanted to ensure every peasant had a chicken in the pot, though the plant was named well before his reign. The truth likely involves neither kings nor sprites, but medieval marketing at its finest. Slap royal on anything, and suddenly everyone wants to eat weeds. In the kitchen, Good King Henry functioned much like spinach. Peasants would boil the young leaves briefly in water, then fry them with a bit of fat, if they were lucky enough to have any. The taste is earthy with a slight bitterness that medieval people hardly noticed given the limited alternatives. A 15th century cooking record mentions that even the poorest households keep patches of bonus henricus for when nothing else might grow. What made Good King Henry particularly valuable to medieval communities was its hardiness. The plant is nearly indestructible, surviving frost, drought, poor soil, and neglect. It also contains impressive amounts of vitamin C, helping medieval peasants avoid scurvy during harsh winters when fresh fruits were unavailable. It was basically the medieval multivitamin, minus the fruity flavors and cartoon character shapes. Despite feeding generations of Europeans, good King Henry disappeared from our diets when cultivated spinach became widely available in the 1600s. Spinach offered a milder flavor and larger leaves, making it more appealing to changing tastes. By the 1800s, good King Henry had been relegated to livestock fodder and eventually forgotten entirely. Today, this resilient plant still grows wild in many parts of Europe, often considered a weed by gardeners who don't recognize its historical importance. A few heritage seed companies have begun selling good King Henry seeds again, marketing it as a perennial spinach for sustainable gardens. While good King Henry faced extinction due to changing tastes, another medieval fruit actually required extreme patience to enjoy. People complain about bananas ripening too fast, but medlars were the opposite. You had to wait until they practically turned to mush. This strange medieval fruit wasn't just rare. It demanded extreme patience from anyone who wanted to eat it. The medlar, scientifically known as Mespilus germanica, looks like a small russet-colored apple with a wide-open bottom that reveals its 5 seeds. Raw medlars are rock-hard and extremely bitter, completely inedible. Unlike most fruits, which are best eaten when ripe, medlars required a process called bledding before they could be enjoyed. Bledding involved picking the fruits after the first frost, then storing them for weeks until they softened and fermented slightly. The proper way to store them was to place them on straw with their stem end down, then wait, and wait, and wait some more. Medieval people typically waited 2 to 3 weeks until the fruits turned dark brown and wrinkly, with flesh that had the consistency of applesauce. A 14th century manuscript describes the ideal medlar texture as soft as dung and sweet as honey. Not exactly the slogan you'd put on a modern fruit display, but medieval people knew what they were doing. The waiting transformed the hard, astringent flesh into something delicious with a unique flavor described as a mix of cinnamon-spiced applesauce, wine, and honey. Despite the unusual preparation, medlars were incredibly popular throughout medieval Europe. They appear in numerous recipes and feast records from the 12th through 16th centuries. One castle inventory from 1467 lists over 20 bushels of medlars stored for winter. Clearly, they were worth the wait. Medlars had several advantages that made them valuable to medieval households. They ripened late in the year when other fresh fruits were long gone. Once bledded, they could be eaten raw by scooping out the flesh with a spoon, cooked into preserves, or fermented into a type of cider. And unlike many fruits, they were high in vitamin C, helping to prevent scurvy during winter months. The medlar even gained a crude nickname in medieval England, open arse, because of the fruit's wide open bottom end. Medieval humor wasn't exactly subtle. This nickname appears in numerous writings, including Shakespeare's works, showing just how familiar medieval people were with this now forgotten fruit. What caused the medlar's disappearance? Simply put, convenience won out. As transportation improved and imported citrus became more available year-round, people lost patience for fruits that needed weeks of careful storage before they could be eaten. By the early 1800s, medlars had mostly vanished from markets and gardens. The strange waiting period required for medlars might have been too much for most people, but at least they eventually tasted good, which is more than can be said for our next forgotten vegetable. Let's talk about skunk cabbage, a medieval vegetable whose name alone should tell you everything you need to know about why it disappeared from our dinner tables. Some foods have a smell that makes you wonder if medieval people had working noses. This pungent plant was actually eaten throughout parts of medieval Europe, especially during times when food was scarce. Skunk cabbage, scientifically known as Symplocarpus foetidus, grows naturally in wet, marshy areas across Europe and parts of North America. The plant features large, cabbage-like leaves that can grow up to 2 feet long. When any part of the plant is damaged, it releases a strong, skunk-like odor that can be detected from several feet away. This smell serves as a natural defense mechanism against animals who might otherwise eat it, though medieval humans were apparently more determined than your average forest creature. The preparation of skunk cabbage was nothing short of an odor elimination marathon. Medieval cooks would first boil the young leaves in at least 3 changes of water. sometimes adding salt, vinegar, or wood ash to help neutralize the smell. After this extensive process, the leaves were typically chopped and cooked again with strong flavors like garlic, onions, and whatever herbs were available. The cooking instructions might as well have read, "Boil until your neighbors stop complaining about the smell." Despite the tremendous effort required to make it edible, there were practical reasons why medieval people bothered with skunk cabbage. The plant appears early in spring, often while snow is still on the ground, making it one of the first fresh greens available after winter. For communities that had depleted their stored vegetables and were suffering from a lack of vitamin C, those smelly leaves could prevent scurvy and provide essential nutrients during the hunger gap before other crops were ready. Several medieval medical texts mention skunk cabbage as a remedy for various ailments. A 13th century healing manual recommends poultices made from the leaves to reduce swelling and treat respiratory problems. Whether these treatments worked is debatable, but the strong smell might have convinced patients something powerful was happening, or at least made them forget about their original ailment. Skunk cabbage fell from popularity as food became more plentiful and trade brought better tasting alternatives to Europe. By the late Middle Ages, people had apparently realized that food probably shouldn't smell like something died in your kitchen. The final blow to skunk cabbage's culinary career came with the introduction of more palatable spring vegetables that didn't require such elaborate preparation. While skunk cabbage challenged people's sense of smell, another leafy green tested medieval religious authorities in a completely different way. Some people today still can't handle arugula's peppery taste, but in medieval times they couldn't handle its reputation. This leafy green that now garnishes fancy restaurant plates was once considered so problematic that some religious communities actually banned it from their gardens. Rocket, known today as arugula, has been cultivated around the Mediterranean since Roman times. Its distinctive peppery flavor made it popular in ancient salads long before modern chefs rediscovered it. The slender, lobed leaves grow quickly and easily in most climates, which should have made it a staple in medieval gardens across Europe. But rocket had a public relations problem that almost led to its disappearance. Throughout the Middle Ages, rocket gained a reputation as an aphrodisiac, a food that could increase sexual desire. This reputation wasn't entirely based on superstition. Rocket contains compounds that increase blood flow and can act as a mild stimulant. In a time when religious authorities controlled much of daily life, any food believed to excite passions was viewed with suspicion. A monastic gardening guide from the 11th century warns, "The rocket heats the blood and should not be eaten by young monks who struggle against temptation of the flesh." Imagine getting sent to confession because you ate a salad. Several religious communities specifically prohibited growing rocket in monastery gardens, effectively removing one of the main places where plant cultivation knowledge was preserved and passed down. Despite these concerns, rocket remained popular in secular medieval cooking. It was typically eaten raw in salads mixed with milder greens to balance its strong flavor. Some physicians recommended it to improve digestion and clear the sinuses, benefits that had nothing to do with its more controversial reputation. By the late Middle Ages, as other leafy vegetables became more widely cultivated, rocket gradually disappeared from European tables. Lettuce varieties that were milder, larger, and easier to grow replaced the spicy leaves in most gardens. The leaf that was too spicy for medieval taste buds and too spicy for medieval morals found itself kicked out of the kitchen garden. Rocket's disappearance lasted several centuries until Italian immigrants brought it back to popular attention in the early 1900s. Today, arugula is one of the trendiest salad greens, appearing in restaurants worldwide. Modern nutritionists praise it for being packed with vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, benefits medieval people recognized without understanding the science behind them. While rocket vanished primarily because of its controversial reputation, our next medieval vegetable disappeared for a much more practical reason. Our next medieval crop was interesting for a completely different reason. Would you eat something that was also used to dye clothes blue? Woad was more famous for coloring fabric than filling stomachs in medieval Europe. The leaves of the woad plant contain a natural blue dye that was Europe's only source of blue color for centuries. Making woad dye wasn't pleasant. It required fermenting crushed leaves in human urine. Medieval woad workers were easy to identify in a crowd. They were the blue people nobody wanted to stand next to. Few people know woad was also eaten. Young leaves could be harvested like spinach before they became too bitter. During famines, people reluctantly ate woad, though a record from 1317 notes it provides little nourishment and turns the tongue blue. Woad lost its value in the 1600s when indigo from Asia became available. With better food options and cheaper dyes, woad quickly disappeared from gardens across Europe. While woad was never popular as food, our final forgotten vegetable once held a much more respected place in medieval kitchens. Before sugar became common, people relied on parsnips for their sweetness. Parsnips were stars of medieval European kitchens. These pale roots naturally develop an intense sweetness after winter frosts. Medieval cooks used them in everything from stews to sweet pies. A cookbook from 1390 lists 11 different parsnip recipes, showing how versatile and important they were to medieval cuisine. Two foods caused parsnips' downfall: sugar and potatoes. As imported sugar became more affordable, parsnips were no longer needed as sweeteners. Meanwhile, potatoes offered higher yields and more calories. From medieval superstar to occasional side dish, it's like a root vegetable version of a one-hit wonder. Over time, these 10 medieval vegetables faded from our plates, but who knows what forgotten foods might make comebacks in the future.